They say time heals all wounds. I used to believe that too, until I learned that some wounds don't heal. They simply scar over so deeply that you forget what it felt like to be whole. My name is Annabelle, and 12 years ago, I lost my daughter. Not to death, but to distance, pride, and silence. It's strange how quiet a house can be after love has left it. For years, I would wake up expecting to hear laughter, footsteps, or the sound of the phone ringing with a familiar, "Hi, Mom." But all I heard was the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock that marked every minute of abandonment. When Eleanor stopped calling, I thought it was a phase, a young woman trying to build her own life, her own family. I told myself, give her space, Annabelle. Don't smother her. But space turned into silence, and silence became the language we spoke for over a decade. People used to ask about her at church, in the market, even at the little bakery where I sold my desserts to make ends meet. "How's Eleanor doing?" they would say with kind smiles. I'd lie every time. "Oh, she's fine," I'd answer. "Busy with the kids." Inside, the lie burned like acid, because I didn't even know what my grandchildren looked like. I remember one particular winter night. The rain was tapping on the window like 1,000 tiny fingers, and the heater had long stopped working. I was sitting on the floor surrounded by toys, small stuffed animals, picture books, a toy train I had bought years ago. I used to tell myself that one day Eleanor would show up with the children and I'd finally be able to give them those gifts. But that day never came. When you've been forgotten by the people you love most, you start to forget parts of yourself too. I stopped looking in mirrors because the reflection only reminded me of the years I had wasted waiting. My hair turned gray faster than it should have, my hands roughened from work, and my heart became cautious, wrapped in layers of quiet dignity. Then, one day, everything changed. A letter arrived. It wasn't from Eleanor. It was from a lawyer. My distant cousin had passed away, leaving behind a small inheritance, a house by the sea. The news felt unreal, almost cruel. After years of scraping by, of counting coins just to buy sugar for my pies, the universe had suddenly handed me freedom. I sold what little I had and moved into the coastal house within weeks. The day I arrived, the air smelled like salt and renewal. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, vast and unapologetic. I remember thinking, this is where I start again. The house was small but perfect. White walls, wide windows, a terrace that caught the afternoon sun. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without the weight of waiting on my chest. I created new routines, morning walks along the beach, coffee on the terrace, evenings spent reading or writing letters I never sent. And then I met Martha. She lived just 2 houses down, a widow with the kind of wisdom that comes from surviving heartbreak. We became fast friends. On Wednesday afternoons, she and a few other women would come over for tea and dessert. We'd talk, laugh, and sometimes cry, each of us carrying our own story of family abandonment. There was comfort in shared pain, in knowing I wasn't alone. It was during one of those afternoons that Martha said something I'll never forget. "Freedom," she told me, stirring her tea, "is realizing you don't need the approval of those who hurt you to be happy." Her words sank into my heart like sunlight through fog. For the first time, I stopped feeling guilty for existing without my family. I began to love my solitude. Mornings smelled of coffee and sea breeze. Afternoons were filled with the gentle hum of waves crashing against the rocks. I even started a small support group for older women who had been cast aside by their own children. We called it the Second Bloom. Every Wednesday, we shared not just our stories, but our recipes, our hopes, our rediscovered laughter. Still, there were nights when the past returned uninvited. Sometimes I would stand by the window, watching the moonlight shimmer over the water, and wonder if Eleanor ever thought of me. Did she ever tell her children about their grandmother? Did they even know my name? I never stopped loving her. That's the cruelest part of unconditional love. It survives even when it's unwanted. But I had made peace with the idea that I would probably never see her again. And then, one quiet afternoon, something happened that shattered that peace. It was late autumn. The air was crisp, the sea restless. I had just finished watering the small rose bushes I had planted in the backyard. a symbol of my rebirth. Their red petals glowed under the pale sun. I remember thinking how far I had come from the woman who once cried herself to sleep in a one-room apartment. Then, there was a knock at the door. At first, I thought it was Martha. She sometimes dropped by unannounced with fresh bread or stories from town. But when I opened the door, my breath caught in my throat. There she was, Eleanor, my daughter. Older, thinner, her eyes hollow with something that looked like shame or fear. And beside her stood Gregory, her husband, the man who had orchestrated my exile from their lives. For a moment, the world stopped moving. The only sound was the crashing of waves outside. I felt as if I were seeing ghosts. 12 years of silence condensed into a single second. "Mom," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Can we come in?" I didn't answer right away. My heart was a battlefield of emotions: love, rage, disbelief, and a strange calm. I stepped aside silently, motioning them in. The house, once a haven of peace, suddenly felt too small, too heavy with the weight of the past. As they entered, I realized something with painful clarity. This wasn't a family reunion. It was something else, something calculated. But I didn't say a word. Not yet. I simply closed the door behind them and prepared to face the ghosts I had buried years ago. The air in the room grew dense the moment I closed the door behind them. It was as though the sea itself had stopped breathing, waiting to witness what would unfold between a mother and the daughter who had vanished for 12 long years. Eleanor stood in the center of my living room, her hands twisting the strap of her purse nervously. Gregory, always composed, always controlling, looked around with an assessing gaze, the kind of look people give when they're already calculating value. My home, my peace, my life, it was all being silently evaluated. "It's beautiful here," Eleanor said finally, her voice small, fragile, almost rehearsed. "Yes," I replied, my tone even. "It is." Gregory stepped forward, offering that thin, polite smile he'd worn the last time I saw him. "Annabelle, you've done well for yourself. I have to admit, I didn't expect to find you in a place like this." The condescension in his voice was subtle, but unmistakable. I didn't flinch. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? He gave a short laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Indeed, I motioned for them to sit. The couch seemed to swallow them both. The once glamorous couple who used to flaunt their perfect marriage now looked worn, their elegance faded. Eleanor's eyes darted around the room, landing briefly on a shelf filled with framed photographs, old family pictures, snapshots of me and my friends from the support group, a few of my garden blooming in summer light. Her gaze lingered on one photograph in particular, a small, faded image of her as a child, missing her front teeth, hugging me around the waist. She didn't say anything, but her lips trembled. "So," I said after a long silence, "what brings you here?" Eleanor looked at Gregory, then back at me. "We wanted to see you." I raised an eyebrow. "After 12 years? Her lower lip quivered. I know how it sounds. But things have been difficult lately, and difficult." I cut in gently, though my voice carried steel. "You mean more difficult than they were when you decided to disappear from my life without a word?" Gregory shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. "I made mistakes, Mom. We both did. But please, can we just sit and talk?" I nodded slowly. "Talking is fine. But I prefer honesty over performance." They exchanged another uneasy glance before Gregory leaned forward, folding his hands as though preparing for a negotiation. "Annabelle," he began smoothly, "we wouldn't have come here if we weren't in serious trouble. I'll spare you the long version. We've hit a rough patch financially. The business collapsed. We lost the house, most of our savings, and—" I held up a hand. "Stop." He froze, surprised. "Before you go any further," I said calmly, "answer me this. Why now? Why come to me after 12 years of silence?" Eleanor's eyes darted to Gregory again, but he stayed quiet. It was clear she didn't have a script for this question. "Because we didn't know where else to go," she whispered finally. For a moment, the room fell into a silence so thick it was almost suffocating. I stared at my daughter, the woman who once called me her best friend, her safe place, and I saw not the little girl from the photo, but a stranger molded by someone else's will. I took a deep breath and looked toward the window, where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor. "You know, Eleanor," I said softly, "when I first moved here, I thought about you every day. I used to imagine what it would be like if you showed up at my door one morning, saying you missed me. But I always pictured it differently. I thought it would be about love, not necessity." Her tears finally broke free, tracing silent paths down her cheeks. "Mom, please don't say that. I know I hurt you. I know I did terrible things, but You didn't do them alone," I interrupted. My eyes flicked to Gregory. "You had help." Gregory straightened, his mask of civility cracking slightly. "I don't think this is fair, Annabelle. Whatever happened between you and Eleanor years ago? Whatever happened?" I echoed sharply, the first hint of anger creeping into my tone. "You mean the years of silence? The birthdays forgotten? The letters returned unopened? The time I spent wondering if my own daughter was dead or alive?" Eleanor covered her face with her hands, sobbing softly. Gregory's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. "I'm not saying this to hurt you," I continued, my voice steady again. "I just want the truth. You didn't come here for reconciliation. You came because you need something from me." Eleanor's sobs quieted. She looked up defeated. "Yes," she whispered. "We need help. Financial help. We've lost everything and—" Her voice broke. "We don't have anyone else." The confession hung between us, raw and heavy. I sat back, my fingers tracing the rim of my teacup. For a moment I said nothing. I simply studied her, the woman who once called me Mommy, now sitting before me like a beggar asking for mercy. "You know," I said quietly, "the irony isn't lost on me. 12 years ago, you chose to erase me from your life because I didn't fit into the image Gregory wanted. I was too emotional, too involved, too much of a reminder that love isn't always convenient. And now, when life has shown you how fragile convenience is, you come back to the one person who would never have abandoned you." Eleanor wiped her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. You don't need to deserve forgiveness," I said softly, "but you do need to understand what you're asking for." Gregory shifted again, trying to reclaim control. "Annabelle, we're not asking for charity. Think of it as a loan, temporary support until we get back on our feet." I smiled faintly. "A loan implies trust, Gregory, and I don't trust you." His expression hardened. "That's unfortunate," he said, "because your daughter's future depends on your decision." It was a threat disguised as concern. Classic Gregory. I'd seen this pattern before, the calm manipulation, the pressure disguised as logic. He hadn't changed at all. I stood up slowly and walked toward the window. The ocean shimmered in the fading light, vast and indifferent. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the rhythmic crash of waves against the rocks. Finally, I turned to them. "You can stay for dinner," I said quietly. "But after that, we'll talk about what comes next." Eleanor nodded, relief washing over her face. Gregory gave a curt smile, masking his satisfaction. But inside, I already knew this wasn't a reunion. It was the beginning of a reckoning. As I set the table that evening, I thought of Martha's words again. Freedom is realizing you don't need the approval of those who hurt you to be happy. And I promised myself that no matter what happened next, I wouldn't lose the peace I had fought so hard to find. I still remember the sound of that knock. It wasn't timid, but it wasn't confident either. It carried hesitation, guilt, and something else I couldn't name at first. Maybe desperation. That sound has stayed with me like a whisper that refuses to fade, echoing through the corridors of my mind long after they left. The evening before their visit had been calm. I had spent the day tending to my garden, pruning the lavender bushes and listening to the hum of bees. The air smelled of salt and earth. When the sun dipped behind the horizon, I sat on the terrace with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the waves roll in. My life had become a collection of small, peaceful rituals, moments I had built carefully to protect myself from the chaos of the past. But peace has a strange way of being interrupted just when you start believing it will last forever. That morning, the sky was overcast. The sea was restless, pushing white foam toward the shore as if it too sensed what was coming. I was arranging fresh flowers in a vase when I heard it, a firm, unfamiliar knock that broke the silence of the house. My first thought was that it might be the mail carrier or one of the local fishermen selling his morning catch. But when I opened the door, the world seemed to tilt ever so slightly. Eleanor stood there. At first, I didn't recognize her. Her hair was shorter, her eyes duller, her posture heavy with something I could only describe as defeat. She wore an expensive coat, though the fabric had lost its crispness. Behind her stood Gregory, his arm wrapped protectively, or perhaps possessively, around her shoulders. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes moved quickly, taking in the house, the car parked outside, the garden that stretched toward the cliffs. For a moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the distant roar of the ocean. Then Eleanor whispered, "Hi, Mom," 2 words. 2 fragile syllables that shattered 12 years of silence. I didn't answer right away. My hands trembled slightly, though I forced them to stay at my sides. I had imagined this moment so many times that I almost didn't believe it was real. In my dreams, her voice was always lighter, her face full of warmth. But the woman before me looked like a stranger, wearing my daughter's skin. "Eleanor," I finally said, my voice calm but distant. "I didn't expect to see you again." She tried to smile, but it faltered before reaching her eyes. "I know, I should have come sooner." Gregory spoke next, his tone smooth and polite. "Annabelle, I hope we're not intruding. We just thought it was time." "Time for what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. His kind of man never visits unless there's something to gain. Eleanor took a hesitant step forward. "Can we come in?" For a second I considered saying no. I could have turned them away right then, closed the door, and returned to my quiet life. But curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, made me step aside. "Come in," I said softly. They entered as if crossing into sacred ground, their movements careful, uncertain. The living room smelled faintly of lavender and old books. My armchair sat beside the window, a blanket folded neatly over the backrest. Every detail of the space reflected the peace I had built after years of turmoil. Watching them there felt like seeing 2 ghosts trespassing in a sanctuary. Eleanor looked around, her gaze landing on the family photos displayed on a nearby shelf. Her eyes lingered on one picture, her 5th birthday. In it, she was missing her front teeth, her arms wrapped around my legs as I knelt beside her, both of us laughing. I saw the recognition flicker in her face before she turned away. "You've changed," she said quietly. "So have you," I replied. Gregory, who had been silent, broke in with that practiced charm of his. "It's a lovely place you have here, Annabelle. Peaceful. I can see why you wanted to move away from the city." I met his eyes. "Peaceful doesn't come from a place, Gregory. It comes from the absence of certain people." His jaw tightened, though he forced a smile. "Still the same sharp tongue, I see." "Still the same fragile ego," I countered. Eleanor shot him a warning look, and he fell silent. She took a seat on the couch, clasping her hands in her lap. I remained standing, my back to the window, letting the light outline me like a shield. "I'm not here to argue," she began softly. I didn't know where else to go." Her voice cracked, and in that sound, I heard traces of the little girl she once was, the one who used to run to me after nightmares, who believed I could fix anything with a hug. I wanted to hold her, to tell her that everything would be okay. But years of betrayal built a wall inside me I couldn't cross so easily. "You could have gone anywhere," I said. "Yet you came here. Why?" Gregory spoke before she could. "Because you're family, Annabelle. And family should help each other in times of need." I laughed, quietly but bitterly. "Family should also stay in touch, don't you think?" He ignored the jab. "We've had a run of bad luck. The business failed. We're trying to get back on our feet, but we need help. A short-term arrangement. A loan, if you will." I turned to Eleanor. "And what do you need, my dear? Money or forgiveness?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "Both," she whispered. "Please, Mom, we've lost everything. The house, the savings, even the car barely runs." I didn't know who else to ask. I studied her carefully, searching for sincerity beneath the desperation. There was something genuine there, but it was tangled with years of silence and guilt. The weight of her words pressed against my chest, stirring something fragile and painful within me. Gregory leaned forward, eager now. "We'll pay you back. I promise. Once we stabilize the business again." "Enough," I said sharply. His voice stopped mid-sentence. "If this is a negotiation, you're wasting your time." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Please don't say that. I know we don't deserve your help, but—" "You don't," I said simply. "But that's not the point." She looked at me, confused. "Then what is the point?" I walked to the shelf, picked up the photograph of her as a child, and held it up so they could see. "This little girl," I said, my voice steady, "loved me without condition. She believed I could make the world safe. But somewhere along the way, she let a man convince her that her mother's love was a burden. I want to know what happened to that little girl, Eleanor, because I don't see her anymore." Eleanor stared at the photo as tears streamed down her cheeks. "She grew up," she whispered. "She grew up and became a fool who let fear and pride destroy everything she once loved." Gregory shifted uncomfortably, clearly displeased with the direction of the conversation. "Annabelle, this isn't helping anyone." "Oh, but it is," I replied. "For the first time in 12 years, we're being honest." The sea outside roared louder, as if echoing the tension in the room. I placed the photo back on the shelf and turned toward them. "You came here for help, and you'll get my answer soon. But before that, you'll both have to face what really brought you here. Because it's not bankruptcy. It's the emptiness that comes from abandoning love." The words hung in the air like smoke, thick, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. And as the light began to fade from the room, I realized this wasn't just a reunion. It was Judgment Day. I can still feel the weight of that moment, the air heavy with all the unsaid words that had lived between us for 12 years. Eleanor sat on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling, her eyes darting between me and Gregory as if torn between two loyalties. And in a way she was. She had spent so many years choosing him that she no longer remembered how to choose herself. The silence stretched on until it became unbearable. Then she spoke, her voice small, almost childlike. "Mom, I didn't come here to fight. I came because I don't know what else to do." I didn't answer. I walked slowly to the window and looked out at the horizon. The sea was calm now, almost too calm, as though it was holding its breath, waiting for the storm that was still brewing inside that room. When I finally turned back to face them, I saw what I had refused to see before. Eleanor wasn't just desperate. She was broken. Her spirit, once full of laughter and stubborn light, was dimmed. She looked like a woman who had been living under someone else's shadow for far too long. "Sit down, Eleanor," I said gently. "Tell me what happened." She took a deep breath and began to speak, her words spilling out between sobs and pauses. "After we left, things were good at first. Gregory's business was growing, we had a beautiful home, and I thought we'd built the perfect life. But then, things changed. He got more controlling, more demanding. I wasn't allowed to visit anyone from before, not even you. He said it would distract me from supporting him. I believed him. I thought I was doing what a good wife should do." I stayed silent, letting her speak. The truth was bleeding out of her like a wound that had been festering for years. "I told myself I'd call you one day," she continued. "But then one day became a week, and a week became a year, and by the time I realized how far I'd gone, I didn't know how to come back. I was ashamed. I thought you'd hate me. I wanted to tell her that I never hated her, that I had spent years worrying, praying, and mourning the loss of the daughter who'd vanished without a trace. But I couldn't, not yet. She needed to speak her truth before I offered mine." Gregory cleared his throat, interrupting her confession. "Annabelle, the past won't change anything. What matters is the present. We're in a very difficult situation. I've made some investments that didn't work out. The company went under, and the debts, well, they're substantial." I turned to him slowly. "So the business failed. And you want me to fix that?" He forced a smile. "I wouldn't say fix. Just assist us until we can recover." I leaned against the window frame, crossing my arms. "And what exactly do you expect from me?" He hesitated before answering. "Alone. Enough to cover the debts and get us through the next few months. You've done well for yourself, Annabelle. You could afford it." Eleanor looked at me with pleading eyes. "Mom, please, we wouldn't ask if it weren't serious." "I see," I said, keeping my tone even. So after 12 years of silence, you've come back because you need money. Not because you missed me. Not because you wanted to make amends. But because you're broke. Eleanor's lips trembled. It's not like that. It's exactly like that, I interrupted. You need something, so you came to the one person who used to give you everything. Gregory frowned. That's unfair, Annabelle. No, I said sharply. What's unfair is watching your only child walk away without looking back. What's unfair is hearing strangers talk about her wedding because she never invited you. What's unfair is being erased from her life like a stain she wanted to forget. My words hung between us like shards of glass. Eleanor's face crumpled, and she began to cry quietly. Gregory, ever the strategist, tried to maintain control. Annabelle, he said, his voice low and calculated. Resentment doesn't solve anything. We're family. Surely that means something to you. It used to, I replied. Before you taught my daughter that family is conditional, he sighed, exasperated. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. Emotions? I laughed bitterly. You mean love, loyalty, heartbreak? Yes, Gregory, I am full of emotions. They're what make me human, something you might struggle to understand. For the first time, he had no response. His eyes flicked away, his mask slipping. I turned to Eleanor. Tell me something, dear. Why now? After all this time, what made you decide to come here? She wiped her tears and took a shaky breath. Because I didn't know who else to turn to. Gregory didn't want to come at first, but I insisted. I thought maybe you could forgive me. Forgive you? I repeated softly. Eleanor, forgiveness isn't something you demand when you're desperate. It's something you earn through honesty and change. She looked down at her hands. I know. I moved closer, studying her face. Beneath the weariness, I could still see traces of the girl who used to climb into my lap after school, who'd draw me pictures and say I was her favorite person in the world. That memory hurt more than I expected. You said earlier you didn't know what to do, I said quietly. Maybe that's because you've spent too long letting someone else decide for you. Gregory's jaw tightened. Are you implying? I'm not implying anything, I cut in. I'm stating a fact. Eleanor has been living in your shadow for years. It's written all over her. He glared at me, but I didn't flinch. The years had hardened me. I wasn't the fragile woman he'd dismissed all those years ago. I was steel now. Eleanor looked between us, her tears falling freely. Please stop, both of you. I didn't come here for another fight. Then what did you come for, Eleanor? I asked. For me to write a check and pretend the last 12 years didn't happen? No, she said, her voice trembling. I came because I realized what I lost when I left you. I came because I can't carry the guilt anymore. Her words pierced through me like a knife. For a moment I couldn't speak. The sincerity in her tone was different now, raw, unpolished, real. I sat down across from her. You can't erase the past, Eleanor. But maybe you can start by facing it. Gregory stood abruptly, frustrated. This is going nowhere. Annabelle, if you can't find it in your heart to help your own daughter, then you're not the woman I thought you were. I smiled faintly. You never knew what kind of woman I was. But you're about to find out. He glared at me, but I turned away, done entertaining his arrogance. The room fell silent again. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Outside, the sky had begun to darken, clouds gathering like witnesses to our storm. Stay for dinner, I said at last. It's late. We'll talk after. Eleanor looked at me with wide, uncertain eyes. Gregory exhaled sharply but said nothing. They followed me to the kitchen, their footsteps hesitant, as if stepping deeper into the heart of something they didn't yet understand. As I set the table, I realized that this dinner would not be about food or politeness. It would be a reckoning, and for the first time in 12 years, I was ready to be heard. The clinking of dishes filled the silence that neither of us knew how to break. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and roasted potatoes, the same meal I used to make when Eleanor was a child. It was strange how easily my hands remembered what my heart had long forgotten. Every movement felt deliberate, measured, like I was cooking not to feed but to remind, to bring ghosts to the table and make them look me in the eye. Eleanor sat quietly, folding and unfolding the corner of her napkin. Gregory scrolled through his phone as if he were at a business meeting, rather than sitting across from the woman whose love he'd poisoned years ago. The air between us was thick, pulsing with the tension of everything unsaid. I finally set the tray down and took my seat. "It's been a long time since this house has had guests," I said. My voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent beneath it, something sharper. 12 years, to be exact. Eleanor flinched, her fork frozen midair. Gregory didn't look up. "We didn't mean for it to be that long," she whispered. "No one ever does," I replied, slicing into my food. "Absence has a way of growing quietly, like ivy on a wall. One day you turn around and it's covered everything." The words hung heavy. Gregory set his phone down at last, eyes cool and defensive. "We can't change what happened, Annabelle. We're here now. That should mean something." "It does," I said softly. "It means you finally ran out of places to go." He scowled, but before he could speak, Eleanor cut in. "Mom, please, don't make this harder than it already is." I looked at her, really looked at her. Her face was thinner now, her expression weary. The bright, defiant spark she once carried had dulled into submission. My heart ached for the child she'd been, but my anger burned for the woman she'd become under his control. "Harder?" I asked. "Eleanor, this is the easiest conversation we've had in years. The hard part was wondering if you were alive. The hard part was waking up every morning to silence." Her eyes filled with tears. "I thought I was protecting myself." "I didn't think—" "No," I interrupted. "You didn't think. You just left." The sound of the clock ticking grew louder, as though the house itself was keeping score. Gregory sighed dramatically, pushing his plate away. "Annabelle, this isn't productive. We're not here to dwell on the past." I turned to him. "Then what are you here for, Gregory? To lecture me about forgiveness? To collect what you think I owe you?" He leaned back in his chair, trying to appear calm. "We're here for a fresh start." "You mean a bailout?" I corrected. "Let's not dress greed up as redemption." Eleanor reached across the table. "Mom, please! He's just trying to find the right words." "Then maybe he should have practiced for the last 12 years, I snapped. The room went still. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the window, the rhythm steady, almost like a heartbeat. I breathed in slowly, trying to steady myself. Anger wouldn't heal anything, it never had. But it was the only language they seemed to understand. Eleanor's voice trembled. "You think I don't regret what I did? I've carried it every day, Mom, every birthday, every Christmas, every moment I wanted to call but didn't. You were always there, even when I pretended you weren't." Her confession pierced through me. For a moment, I forgot my resentment and saw only my child, lost, frightened, reaching for something she no longer knew how to hold. I set my knife down gently. "Then why didn't you?" "Because I was ashamed," she whispered. "Because I didn't think I deserved you anymore." The words cracked something inside me. I wanted to reach out, to tell her she'd always been mine, but before I could, Gregory's voice cut through the tenderness like a blade. "This is getting us nowhere," he said. "We didn't come here for therapy." "No," I said. "You came here for money. And that's exactly what this is about, how you treat people as resources, not souls." He met my eyes, his expression hardening. "You think you're above us because you have savings and a quiet house by the sea. But don't forget, Annabelle, you weren't perfect either. You drove people away." His words hit like a slap. "I drove people away?" I repeated quietly. "I gave everything I had to you, to her, and you both walked out as if my love was a burden." "Don't twist that into a sin." Eleanor reached for his arm. "Gregory, please, stop." He ignored her. "Maybe if you weren't so controlling, Eleanor wouldn't have left in the first place." That was it, the final insult. I rose from my seat, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You have no idea what you're talking about. I taught her to stand on her own 2 feet. You're the one who taught her how to kneel." Gregory stood too, his tone rising. "You think you know everything about our marriage?" "No," I said, stepping closer. "But I know the sound of a man who needs to belittle a woman just to feel tall." Eleanor stood between us, her voice breaking. "Stop, both of you!" She turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, please don't. I can't do this again." The rain outside grew heavier, blurring the glass with streaks of gray. I felt my chest tighten with years of hurt that had never found words. "I'm not fighting, Eleanor," I said quietly. "I'm just done pretending," Gregory scoffed. "You're impossible." I met his gaze with a calm I didn't know I possessed. "No, I'm finished being convenient." He muttered something under his breath and stormed out toward the porch, the door slamming behind him. The echo rattled through the house like thunder. Eleanor stood there, trembling. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I walked to her and took her hands in mine. They were cold, fragile, like glass that might shatter with the wrong touch. "You've spent years apologizing to yourself in silence. Maybe it's time you stop saying sorry and start living." She looked up at me, her eyes wet but clearer now. "I don't know how." "You will," I said softly. "But not while you're still tied to a man who makes you small." Her lip quivered. "He's all I have." "No," I whispered. "You have me. You always did." The words lingered between us, a fragile bridge over the years we'd lost. Outside, the storm softened, the sound of rain turning into a steady hush, as if the world was finally exhaling. For the first time that evening, Eleanor didn't look away. She held my gaze, her tears falling silently. Somewhere inside that sorrow, I saw the faint flicker of the woman she might become again, the woman she used to be. As I blew out the candle on the table, the room dimmed to a quiet glow. "Go to bed, Eleanor," I said gently. "We'll talk in the morning, without him." She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." When she disappeared down the hallway, I turned toward the dark window and caught my own reflection staring back. My eyes looked older but not weak. I saw strength there, hard-earned, unyielding. The years had taken much from me, but they'd given me something far greater in return. The courage to stand in the ruins and still believe in rebuilding. Tomorrow, I would learn whether Eleanor wanted the same. The morning came gray and heavy, the kind of coastal dawn that blurs the line between sea and sky. I woke to the sound of gulls crying over the cliffs and the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen. For a moment, I almost believed it was an ordinary day, Eleanor helping me make breakfast, just like before. But when I walked down the hall and saw her sitting alone at the table, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow, reality returned like a cold wind. Gregory was gone. His suitcase had vanished from the guest room, the bed neatly made, as if he'd never been there at all. A note lay on the table beside Eleanor's untouched coffee. I picked it up and read it aloud. "Eleanor, I'm going back to the city. I can't stay here while your mother poisons you against me. When you're ready to think clearly, you know where to find me." No signature. No apology. Just that sterile arrogance I'd come to expect. Eleanor's voice trembled. "He left before sunrise. Didn't even wake me. I think he knew I wouldn't follow." I folded the note in half and placed it beside her. "Then maybe, Eleanor, this is your chance to breathe." She looked up, her eyes swollen from crying. "You don't understand, Mom. He was my whole life. I built everything around him." "That's exactly the problem," I said gently. "You built your life around a man who needed you to shrink so he could feel tall." She winced, but didn't argue. For a long time, she just stared into her coffee, watching the steam fade. Then quietly she said, "You must hate me." I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "No, Eleanor, I could never hate you, but I can't pretend you didn't hurt me either." Tears filled her eyes again. "I thought love meant loyalty. I thought choosing my husband meant doing the right thing." I sighed. "Love isn't loyalty when it demands your silence. You didn't choose love, Eleanor. You chose fear. Fear of being alone, fear of disappointing him, fear of losing comfort. But comfort bought with obedience isn't safety. It's a cage." Her chin trembled as she whispered, "He said you were bitter, that you resented our happiness." I smiled faintly, though the memory stung. Of course he did. Controlling men always rewrite the story so they look like the heroes. And women like me, women who refuse to stay quiet, we become the villains. Eleanor dropped her gaze. "I believed him, I know," I said softly. "You were young. You wanted to belong. I can forgive that. What I can't forgive is pretending it never happened." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rain beginning again outside, soft and steady. It felt like the sky was cleansing something. Not just the air, but us too. Eleanor finally whispered, "I don't even know who I am anymore." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Then it's time to find out. Not as Gregory's wife, not even as my daughter, but as you." She looked at me, truly looked, and I saw the flicker of something that hadn't been there before. Awareness. Maybe even the first spark of self-respect. Later that afternoon, We sat on the terrace watching the ocean roll in slow, endless waves. The light had shifted. The sky had opened up into pale gold. It was the kind of beauty you could miss if you were too busy running from yourself. Eleanor spoke suddenly, her voice fragile but steady. "You know what's strange? I used to tell myself you were weak, that you needed drama. That's what Gregory always said. But sitting here now, I realize you were never weak. You were just alone. And that terrified me. Her honesty caught me off guard. Alone doesn't have to mean lonely," I said. "I used to think I needed a full house to feel loved. But peace is its own kind of love." She nodded slowly. "I never understood that until now." A long silence stretched between us, not heavy this time, but gentle. Then she asked, "When Dad died, were you this calm? This peaceful?" I turned my gaze to the sea. "No. When your father died, I felt like half of me went with him. But grief is a strange teacher. It stripped me bare, showed me who I was without anyone else to define me. I learned that love doesn't die when people leave. It just changes shape." Eleanor's lips trembled. "I wish I'd known that sooner," I smiled softly. "You couldn't have. Some lessons only come when you've lost everything you thought you needed." That evening, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something in me knew it was him. Gregory's voice came through, sharp and desperate. "Annabelle, I need to talk to Eleanor." "She's here," I said evenly. "But I don't think she wants to talk to you right now," he scoffed. "Of course you'd say that. You've always wanted to turn her against me. You've poisoned her mind." "Gregory," I said, "you did that all on your own." His tone turned bitter. "You think she'll survive without me? She's nothing without structure. Without me, she's free," I interrupted. "That's the word you're looking for." There was a long silence on the line. Then, low and venomous, he said, "You'll regret this." I hung up without another word. Eleanor stood behind me, pale and trembling. "What did he say?" "Nothing worth remembering," I replied. "He's just a man who doesn't know what to do when his mask finally cracks." Her voice shook. "He's never sounded like that before." "That's because you've never stopped listening long enough to hear him," I said softly. "When people lose control, their true selves appear. Now you've seen his." She leaned against the wall, eyes closed, breathing unevenly. "I'm scared." I stepped closer and put a hand on her shoulder. "Fear is the first step to freedom, Eleanor. It means you're standing on the edge of change." She nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't know where to go from here." "Forward," I said simply. "Always forward." That night I couldn't sleep. I walked out to the terrace, the moonlight silver on the water, the air heavy with salt and truth. Inside I could hear Eleanor's soft sobs through the thin walls. But they were different this time. Not the tears of a victim, but the release of a woman awakening from a long, terrible dream. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer to the sea. Not for forgiveness, not even for peace, but for strength. For both of us. For 12 years I had survived her absence. Now perhaps she would learn to survive her own. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains in thin gold ribbons. For a moment, the house looked softer, almost forgiving, as though it too was willing to give us one more chance at peace. I made coffee and set out 2 cups, listening to the distant hum of waves colliding with the rocks below. Eleanor emerged from the guest room looking like a ghost of herself. Hair uncombed, eyes swollen, wearing one of my old sweaters that hung loose on her frame. "Morning," she whispered. "Morning," I replied, pouring her a cup. She sat down across from me, clutching the mug with both hands like it might anchor her to this reality. For a few minutes neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, "I didn't tell you everything yesterday." I met her eyes. I figured as much. She looked down, ashamed. "Gregory didn't just lose his business. He lost everything. The house is gone, the cars. Even the kids' school tuition hasn't been paid in months. We're drowning in debt, Mom." So that was it, the truth, stripped bare at last. I had known it all along, of course. People don't crawl back after 12 years unless desperation is gnawing at their heels. But hearing her admit it was a different kind of wound. "You came here for money," I said softly, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. She winced. "At first, yes. Gregory thought you'd help. He said you owed it to us, to me, After everything, owed it to you? I repeated, laughing bitterly. After 12 years of silence? I know, she whispered, tears spilling. I know how it sounds. I didn't want to come, but he said what? I interrupted. That you were wealthy now, that you had this house by the sea, that you were living comfortably while we were struggling. He said it wasn't fair. I set my cup down carefully. Fair? Eleanor, fairness would have been you visiting me when I could barely afford food. Fairness would have been a phone call, a letter, a knock on the door when I needed my daughter the most. She sobbed, hiding her face in her hands. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize how cruel it was until I saw you again. I took a deep breath and looked out toward the window where sunlight danced on the waves. Sorry is a word, Eleanor. Change is an action. She looked up, eyes pleading. I'll change. I swear I will. I need your help to start over. Before I could answer, the front door swung open. Gregory stood there, his presence filling the room like smoke. His clothes were rumpled, his face tense, eyes darting between us. So this is what it's come to, he said bitterly. You turning her against me just like before. Before? I repeated, rising from my chair. Gregory, I never turned her against you. You did that all on your own. He ignored me, turning his attention to Eleanor. What did she say to you? That I'm a monster? That you'd be better off without me? Eleanor's voice was quiet, trembling. You are a monster when you talk to her like that. His face darkened. Don't start with that feminist nonsense again. You don't know what you're saying, I stepped between them. She knows exactly what she's saying, Gregory. You just don't like hearing it, he glared at me, jaw tight. You've always been dramatic, Annabelle. Always looking for an enemy to blame. Maybe that's why your daughter left you in the first place. For a moment, I almost laughed. The audacity of the man. No, Gregory. She left because you convinced her that love was manipulation and independence was disobedience. Eleanor's breathing grew shallow. Stop it, she whispered. Please, both of you, but I wasn't done. Years of suppressed fury poured through me, steady and sharp. You built your marriage on control, not love. You taught her to doubt herself, to shrink for your comfort. And now you're here, demanding money like the parasite you've always been. His face twisted into something dark, something feral. Watch your mouth, old woman. Old, I said calmly, but not weak. He took a step forward, but Eleanor rose and blocked him. No, Gregory, not this time. He blinked, taken aback. What? I said no, she repeated, her voice steadier now. You don't get to talk to her like that. You don't get to talk to me like that either, he scoffed. You're being manipulated. Can't you see she's enjoying this? She wants to see us fall apart. Eleanor shook her head. No, you're wrong. She's the only one who's ever told me the truth. A silence fell, the kind that hums with the weight of something breaking. Then Gregory spoke again, quieter, colder. You think you can survive without me? You think she'll save you? Eleanor's answer was a whisper, but it struck like thunder. I don't need saving anymore. I watched his face crumble, just for a moment, before the mask slid back into place. He straightened his coat, muttered something under his breath, and turned toward the door. This isn't over, he said, his voice shaking with rage. You'll both regret this. He slammed the door so hard that the glass rattled in its frame. The sound lingered long after he was gone. Eleanor sank into a chair, trembling. I went to her, placed a hand on her shoulder, and felt her body collapse into quiet sobs. He's never left like that before, she murmured. He always comes back. Then maybe it's time he doesn't, I said softly. She looked up at me, eyes red but clear. I don't know how to live without him. Yes, you do, I said. You just don't remember yet. Outside, the sea roared against the cliffs, wild and unrelenting. For the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. Not victory, not vindication, but release. The kind that comes when the truth has finally been spoken, no matter how ugly it is. As the wind whipped through the open window, I realized that the real reason they had come was never about money. It was about power, control, validation. And now, stripped of all that, perhaps Eleanor could finally begin to see herself clearly. But I knew Gregory. Men like him didn't give up that easily. The storm wasn't over, not yet. That night, the wind rose and howled against the house like a wounded animal. The shutters rattled, the waves crashed harder, and the air itself seemed charged with unfinished business. I couldn't sleep. I paced the floor of my small living room, the taste of salt thick in the air, knowing that something inevitable, was coming. Eleanor was asleep in the guest room. Or at least she was trying to. Every so often, I could hear her shifting, sighing, murmuring things in her sleep that sounded like apologies. I poured myself a small glass of wine and stood by the window, watching the whitecaps roll across the dark sea. I didn't need to guess what haunted her dreams. Shame, regret, the ghosts of all the choices she had made under Gregory's thumb. They would keep her awake long after the storm passed. Still, there was a faint hope in her eyes now, something I hadn't seen since she was a little girl, the spark of someone beginning to reclaim herself. The phone rang suddenly, sharp and violent in the silence. I froze, staring at it. The sound seemed to slice through the wind and the ocean and straight through my chest. For a moment, I thought about letting it ring out. But my instincts told me who it was before I even picked up. "Annabelle," Gregory's voice hissed through the receiver. "Put Eleanor on the phone." "No," I said simply. "I heard you," I interrupted. "And my answer stands." There was a pause, then a low laugh that didn't sound human. "You think you're protecting her? You're destroying her. She needs me." "Needs you?" I repeated. "She needs freedom. She needs peace. She needs to remember who she was before you convinced her that love was obedience." He scoffed. "You always had a way with words, twisting everything until you sound righteous. That's why your husband left you, isn't it?" It didn't hurt anymore. The old insults had lost their power. "He died, Gregory," I said quietly. "He didn't leave. But even in death, he treated me with more respect than you've ever shown anyone alive." He went silent. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, colder. "You're going to regret this. Threats won't work on me anymore." Then the line went dead. I stood there for a long moment, the phone still in my hand, listening to the dial tone. Something deep inside me knew that the storm outside wasn't just weather, it was an omen. By morning, the sea had calmed, leaving the world washed clean and raw. The sky was the color of pale smoke, the light diffuse and uncertain. I made breakfast in silence. Eleanor joined me, her face pale but her posture straighter. "I dreamt he came back," she said quietly, "but not as my husband. As something else, something that wanted to pull me under." "That sounds about right," I said, handing her a cup of tea. "Dreams have a way of showing us what we refuse to see when we're awake." She smiled faintly. "Maybe it's time I stopped dreaming and started doing." I watched her sip her tea with trembling hands. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, "I'm going to leave him. For real this time." I didn't move, didn't breathe. For a second, I wasn't sure I'd heard her correctly. "You're sure?" I asked softly. She nodded. "For the first time, yes. I called my friend Clara last night. She's been through something similar. She said she can help me find a small place to stay in the city. I just need a few days to figure things out." My chest swelled with a complicated mix of pride and sorrow. "That's brave, Eleanor." "No," she said, shaking her head. "It's overdue." The doorbell rang before I could respond. Eleanor and I exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between us. We both knew who it was, the kind of knock that comes not from uncertainty, but from entitlement. I opened the door slowly, deliberately, as if I could control the pace of whatever was about to unfold. Gregory stood there, his expression calm, too calm. That false serenity that comes right before an explosion. His clothes were damp from the morning mist, his hair disheveled, his jaw tense. "Annabelle," he said curtly, "I've come for my wife." Eleanor's voice trembled behind me. "Gregory, please. Don't do this," he ignored her. "You've had your little rebellion. It's time to come home." I stepped aside just enough to block his way. "She is home," he smirked, tilting his head. "Still trying to play the saint, aren't you? Do you ever stop pretending?" "I stopped pretending 12 years ago," I said. "You should try it sometime." The mask slipped then, just a flicker of rage beneath the surface. He stepped forward, his voice dropping to a growl. "You think she can make it without me? She's weak. She always has been." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "I was weak because I believed you." His eyes snapped toward her. "You don't mean that." "I do," she said. Her voice didn't waver this time. I meant it the first time I left, even if I didn't follow through. But now I'm done. He took a step closer, and instinctively I moved between them again. You need to leave, Gregory, or what? He sneered. Or I call the police, I said, steady as stone. You know I will. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think they'll side with you? A lonely old woman spinning stories about emotional abuse? Try me, I said. My tone was calm, but my hand was already on the phone. For a long moment, we stood there, three people caught in a stalemate of old wounds and unspoken fear. The air was electric, sharp enough to cut. Then, suddenly, Eleanor stepped forward and said the one thing that shattered it all. Gregory, I'm not afraid of you anymore. He froze. His lips parted, but no words came. He looked at her like she'd spoken in a language he couldn't understand. For a man who had spent his life feeding on control, the loss of it was a kind of death. Without another word, he turned and left. The door closed behind him with a finality that felt almost sacred. Eleanor collapsed into a chair, shaking violently. I went to her side and wrapped my arms around her. It's over, I whispered. You did it. I don't feel strong, she murmured. I feel empty. That's normal, I said softly. When you tear down the walls that have trapped you for years, there's a moment before you realize how big the sky really is. She pressed her face into my shoulder. Do you think he'll come back? I looked out the window at the gray, endless sea. Maybe. But next time, he'll find a door that's already closed. That night, as the stars appeared one by one, I sat on the terrace again. The wind had calmed, the ocean breathing steady and deep. For the first time, I felt the kind of quiet that wasn't loneliness. It was peace. But I also knew something else. Every ending is just the beginning of another reckoning. And for Eleanor, that reckoning had only just begun. I didn't expect him to return so soon. Maybe some small part of me believed the storm had finally carried him away, that he'd fade into the background of our lives like a bad memory dissolving into distance. But men like Gregory don't vanish quietly. They circle back when the silence grows too loud, when the person they once controlled starts to breathe on their own. It was late afternoon, just before dusk, when I saw his car again. That same dark blue sedan crawling down the long gravel path toward the house, headlights flickering like watchful eyes. I stood at the window, heart pounding in a rhythm I tried to ignore. Eleanor was upstairs, packing the few things she'd brought. She was leaving that evening. Her friend Clara had found her a small apartment near the city. A new beginning. I wasn't going to let him ruin that. The car stopped. The engine idled for a moment, then went silent. The world held its breath. I could feel the house remembering. Every echo, every word spoken within its walls, the same way I did. This place had seen too many ghosts to ever be comfortable with the living. When the knock came, it wasn't gentle. It was deliberate, sharp, a signal that peace was not what he wanted. I opened the door, my hand steady this time. You shouldn't be here. Gregory stood on the porch, wind whipping through his hair. His eyes were bloodshot, his lips thin and pale. You don't get to tell me where I can be. Actually, I do, I said calmly. This is my home. You're not welcome, he gave a low chuckle. Do you ever stop pretending you're the hero of this little tragedy? You've poisoned her against me, Annabelle. Against her own family. Family doesn't come with fear attached, I said. You lost the right to call her that the day you made her believe she was worthless. He took a step closer. And you think she's any better off here? With you, a bitter old woman drowning in her own regrets? I didn't answer. His words didn't sting anymore. They only revealed the emptiness inside him. I had seen too many bullies mask their weakness with cruelty to ever mistake it for strength again. Eleanor's voice came from behind me. Stop. Gregory froze. She stood on the stairs, a small suitcase in her hand, her face pale but determined. The woman who'd arrived here days ago was gone. This was someone new, fragile, yes, but awake. I'm leaving, she said quietly. And you can't stop me. He laughed, shaking his head. You're being dramatic. You always were. Where will you even go? Anywhere you're not, she said, his jaw clenched. You can't just walk away. I gave you everything. No, she replied, voice trembling but firm. You took everything." He stepped toward her, but I moved between them again, the same instinct that had guided me for years rising like fire in my chest. "Enough, Gregory. You need to leave." He looked at me, something wild flickering behind his eyes. "You don't get it, do you? She's mine." "Not anymore," I said. He shoved past me suddenly, reaching for Eleanor. She stumbled backward, the suitcase falling from her hands. "Gregory, don't!" she cried. Before I could move, his hand was on her wrist, gripping it too tightly, dragging her toward the door. The old terror flashed across her face, the kind I'd seen before, long ago when she was a child too afraid to speak. "Let her go," I shouted. He didn't. His face was red with rage, the veins in his neck visible. "You think you can just walk away from me? After everything I've done for you?" That's when something inside me broke. Or maybe it healed. I grabbed the heavy brass lamp from the side table and slammed it down onto the floor beside him, just loud enough to startle, not to harm. The sound cracked like thunder. He froze, his grip loosening just long enough for Eleanor to pull away. She stumbled back, breathing hard, tears streaking down her cheeks. I stood between them again, the lamp still in my hand. "You ever touch her again, Gregory, and I swear I'll make sure you regret it." For a moment, his eyes met mine, and I saw it. The fear, the realization that the power he'd held for so long was gone. He looked smaller, weaker, a man stripped of the illusion that control made him significant. Then, with a sharp breath, he stepped back. "You're both insane," he muttered. Eleanor spoke then, her voice shaking but loud enough to echo through the house. "No, we're free." He stared at her for a long moment, like he didn't recognize the woman standing in front of him, then turned and walked out the door. When the sound of his footsteps faded, I dropped the lamp onto the table and sank into a chair. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from release. Eleanor collapsed beside me, sobbing. "I thought he'd never let me go," she whispered. "He didn't," I said gently. "You let him go." Later, as the sun sank into the horizon, painting the sky with gold and ash, we sat together on the porch. The sea was calm again, waves breathing steadily against the rocks below. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "Then start with what you do know," I told her. "You know you're alive. You know you want peace. That's more than enough for now." She nodded slowly. "Do you think he'll come back?" "Maybe," I said. "But this time we'll be ready. Fear doesn't last when you've seen its face up close." She looked at me then, truly looked, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she smiled. It wasn't forced or uncertain. It was small and honest, like sunlight finding its way through cracks in stone. We stayed there until the stars came out, until the chill of the night wrapped around us like a quiet promise, and then, as I watched the moon rise over the water, I realized something I hadn't before. This wasn't just Eleanor's story. It was mine too, the years I'd spent waiting, grieving, wondering if love could ever return. All of it had led here, to this moment of fragile, breathtaking freedom. The past had burned away, and what remained was something raw and true. Eleanor was leaving that night. She hugged me at the door, whispering, "Thank you, Mom, for not giving up on me." "I never could," I said. The car lights disappeared down the winding road, and I stood alone on the porch, the air heavy with salt and silence. The house felt lighter somehow, as if it had been holding its breath for years and could finally exhale. But as I turned back toward the house, a shadow moved near the tree line, just a flicker of motion, gone as quickly as it appeared. My pulse quickened. I stared into the darkness, trying to tell if my eyes were deceiving me. Nothing. Only the whisper of the wind and the soft crash of waves below. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that Gregory wasn't done. That something unfinished still lingered between us, the last echo of a storm that refused to die quietly. I closed the door, locked it, and whispered to myself, "Let it come. I'm not afraid anymore." The morning after Eleanor left, the house felt impossibly quiet, a kind of silence that carried weight, like a deep exhale after holding your breath for too long. The sea outside was still restless, but gentler now, each wave whispering against the rocks as though it too, knew something had ended. I brewed coffee, the smell filling the kitchen, and stood by the window watching the sun climb over the horizon. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to rush, to prove, to brace myself for someone's disapproval. The air was mine. The peace was mine. I didn't realize how much of myself I'd given away until I stopped needing to explain my existence to anyone. The phone rang mid-morning. I didn't recognize the number, but when I answered, Eleanor's voice came through, softer than I remembered, yet steadier. "Mom," she said, "I made it. I'm safe." Those words, so simple, so human, made something inside me loosen. "I'm glad," I said, leaning against the counter. "That's all I ever wanted for you." There was a pause. Then, "I know. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." We spoke for nearly an hour, about small things mostly. Her new apartment, how the city lights looked from her window, the sound of the train at night. She told me she'd found a therapist who specialized in emotional abuse and recovery. I told her about the new garden I'd planted, how the roses were finally starting to bloom after years of neglect. We didn't discuss Gregory, not yet. That wound was still too raw, too dangerous to probe. When we hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a long time, phone still in my hand, listening to the echoes of her voice. For the first time in 12 years, there had been no pleading, no manipulation, no conditions. Just connection, fragile, new, but real. That afternoon, Martha came over. She didn't knock. She never did. "So?" she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "How did it all end?" I told her everything. The confrontation, Eleanor's decision, Gregory's departure. She listened without interruption, her eyes sharp but kind. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You did what most mothers can't," she said. "You loved her enough to let her face the truth." I swallowed hard. "Sometimes I wonder if love means walking away." "It does," she replied. "When staying means destroying yourself, walking away becomes the most loving thing you can do." Her words settled over me like sunlight after rain. I didn't need anyone's validation, but still, it mattered, hearing it out loud. After she left, I took my glass of wine to the terrace and sat in my favorite chair. The sea was alive with color, streaks of rose and amber stretching into the horizon. A fishing boat drifted far out, its tiny light flickering like a heartbeat against the dusk. I thought about Gregory, where he might be now, what stories he was spinning to anyone who'd listen. It didn't matter anymore. For the first time, he had no audience here, no one left to absorb his venom or validate his pain. Whatever battles he fought now would be his alone. Weeks passed. The town did exactly what I'd predicted. It whispered, gossiped, and then moved on. The truth has a way of surfacing on its own, and it wasn't long before people began to see Gregory for what he was. The pity that had once been directed at me quietly shifted. When I walked through the market, the women who had once looked at me with judgment now nodded with understanding. Some even approached to share their own stories, tales of sons, daughters, and partners who had drained them dry before vanishing into silence. It was strange how pain connected people, how suffering, when shared, became something almost sacred, a bridge instead of a wall. One morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. The handwriting was unmistakable, Eleanor's, neat, but a little unsteady. "Mom, I've been going to therapy for 6 weeks now. It's not easy, but I'm learning things I wish I'd known years ago, about control, shame, and how love should never feel like a cage. I think about you every day, about how strong you must have been to survive all those years without us. I used to think you were cold, but now I see that you were just protecting yourself. I don't expect forgiveness. Not yet. I just want you to know that I'm trying. I want to become someone who deserves your trust again. Love, Eleanor." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer of my writing desk. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just sat there, feeling the quiet weight of time, the slow, deliberate rhythm of healing. Some wounds don't close completely, I realized. They simply stop bleeding. As summer deepened, my days fell into a gentle rhythm. I woke with the sunrise, walked barefoot across the terrace, and breathed in the scent of salt and lavender. I made breakfast, wrote letters, and visited the Women's Center twice a week to mentor others who had endured emotional abuse. They called me Miss Anna, a nickname that made me laugh every time. Each woman carried her own version of my story, different faces, same ache. We shared tears, laughter, and silence. Sometimes silence was the most powerful gift of all. It meant safety. It meant they didn't have to defend their pain anymore. At night, I returned home and watched the sea. It had become my mirror, vast, unpredictable, but steady beneath the chaos of its waves. One evening, as I was watering the garden, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Eleanor again. "I saw Gregory today. I didn't go to him. I didn't speak. I just walked past him and kept walking. I think that's what freedom feels like." I smiled, tears gathering in the corners of my eyes. I typed back, "That's exactly what it feels like." Months later, on a crisp autumn morning, she came to visit. No warnings, no pleas, just a quiet knock on the door. When I opened it, she stood there in a long gray coat, her hair tied back, eyes clear. "I didn't come for money," she said before I could speak. "I came because I miss you." I stepped aside and let her in. We spent the day cooking, laughing, crying, rediscovering what it meant to be mother and daughter without all the ghosts between us. She helped me pick herbs from the garden, and I taught her how to make the old lemon tart she loved as a child. As the sun went down, we sat on the terrace again, glasses of wine in hand, watching the horizon turn red. She turned to me and said softly, "Do you ever think we'll be okay?" I took her hand. "We already are. The hardest part is over." That night, after she went to bed in the guest room, I stepped outside one last time. The moon was full, lighting up the water in silver ribbons. The air smelled of jasmine and salt. I closed my eyes and listened to the waves, the wind, and my own steady heartbeat. I thought about the girl in the photograph, 5 years old, toothless smile, eyes full of love. I thought about the woman she became and the woman I had to become to meet her again. And I realized something beautiful and terrifying all at once. We weren't the same people anymore. But maybe that was the point. Forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about living fully despite it. When I went back inside, I paused by the family photo shelf and added one more picture. Eleanor and me from that day, laughing in the kitchen, flour on our hands. I placed it beside the old one, the child and the woman finally side by side. For the first time, it didn't hurt to look. The sea sighed softly outside. A lullaby for everything that had ended and everything still to come. I whispered a quiet goodbye to the past, to the years of longing, to the ghosts that no longer belonged in my home, and then, with the same steady calm that had carried me through everything, I turned off the lights and let the night embrace me, free, whole, and finally at peace.